Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Van Buren Variety Show. I am Bob Van Buren, your host. I'm so glad you're here. Uh, Episode after episode, we've had interesting guests, interesting topics, and tonight is no exception. I guarantee you're going to really be intrigued by tonight's subject, as I am. So I'm looking forward to our next guest that we'll be bringing on soon. I hope everyone's had a great week. We're already kind of past the new year now. We're already mid January at the time of this episode. I'm actually going to have a better week starting tomorrow. For those of you that have kept up with my episodes for the past, from the beginning, know that I had a little dental issue up here on the upper left of my jaw. Tomorrow, I finally get the dental implant. So instead of me just grinning on this show all the time, I'll be able to show you a big wide smile, hopefully, next time you see me. So, only thing bad about that, I might have mentioned it before, dental implants are not cheap. Yeah. I've got some insurance, but it doesn't cover the whole cost. So hopefully this is not something that's going to be coming on a regular basis, but we never know. So I'm not really interested in, being drilled on and having all the stuff that they're going to put up there. But to get that tooth up there and have it look like my natural teeth, I can't wait. So I'm sure Mr. Wallet's going to be suffering pretty much after tomorrow. But hey, I get my smile back. So that's my week for the rest of the week. Again, I hope your week's gone really, really well as well. Got an interesting topic tonight, and it's one that I think all of us have been intrigued with. Spies. And we're talking both real life spies and the fictional spies that we known, grown to love, like Ethan Hunt. Who doesn't know that name from the Mission Impossible TV series as well as the movies? I mean, that was very intriguing. I mean, another one, been out for a while, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. How about True Lies? And how can we not talk about spies and not talk about James Bond? Yes. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, in my opinion, y'all might disagree, but Sean Connery to me was James Bond. I'm not taking anything away from Roger Moore or everybody else that's played Bond, but when I think of James Bond, I think of Sean Connery right there. All of his great movies from back then. So spies intrigue us. But, there's also been spies that's let us down. Treason, which we'll talk about those. For those of you that know your American history, we'll talk about the names of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Some of you may know those names, some of you may not know, but if you keep listening, we'll tell you all about it. So we're going to be talking about real life spies, which is very, very intriguing, but also the Hollywood version, which I'm sure that we've all paid attention to and really, really entertained us. So there's a lot of political intrigue with being a spy. We've even heard the term double agent. And so if this is something your forte, James Bond, espionage, spying, then you've come to the right show. And just a reminder, if you haven't already subscribed to this channel, to Van Buren Variety, you can get updates on upcoming events and guests. And if you like this video, hey, do our guest tonight a favor and like this video. Press the like button because we like to get feedback from our audience as well. So without further ado, let me bring on an expert, a lot more smarter than I am on the subject. He has written novels himself, which we'll talk about, and you can even be able to order his novels that he's written. So let me bring my guest on for tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Wesley Britton. He has written many, many spy novels, is an expert on a lot of the spy movies and that have been made, and also knows histories of certain intriguing spies in real life. So, Dr. Britton, welcome to the Van Buren Variety Show.
Hi, thank you. I'm glad you brought me aboard.
So let's just jump into it. When did you start getting interested in spies, whether real life or fictional or both?
Oh, I'm 9 years old. That's when Dr.
9 years old.
Well, back in the 60s, you really couldn't avoid spies in the big James Bond bonanza. It had the James Bond movies and all the
Sure.
Copycats, Matt Helm and In Like Flint and all the TV shows, Man from Uncle, The Avengers, you name it.
Yep.
Half the TV shows don't think to do with spies. There'd still be at least a spy episode. Flipper, I Dream of Jeannie. They all dealt with enemy agents.
Yeah, they did. In one way or the other, they did.
Secret Squirrel, Lancelot, Link, Saturday morning cartoons. I mean, it was just unavoidable. And if you're a reader like me, there were the Ian Fleming novels, and then you start to get into Graham Greene, Eric Ambler, all of the books that were, classics at that time. And Len Dayton was coming out, and Jean Le Carré was coming out. How could you not be immersed into the world of spies and espionage and secret agents and everything from the sci-fi kind of stuff that James Bond instigated, along with Man from Uncle and those kind of shows. On the other side, the John Le Carré, more realistic stuff, the spy who came in from the cold and things like that. That's where it all began for me.
We had a comment from the audience. One suggested "Get Smart."
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So let me ask you this: we talked kind of about James Bond a little bit. And we've had different men play James Bond, and very, very good. But in your opinion, who do you think was the best James Bond? And name some James Bond movies that you personally enjoyed.
Well, I'm with you. I think Sean Connery defines the character of James Bond, and everybody since then has been an actor playing James Bond.
Oh, I like that.
But I really kind of like the ones directed by Terrence Young. That's how I define my favorites. Okay. That would be Dr. No, From Russia with Love, and Thunderball, because I think they were the best Sean Connery outings, especially From Russia with Love, because that really defined the template musically and stylistically and everything like that. The Guy Hamiltons were fun too. That's Goldfinger and Diamonds Are Forever.
Yes.
Live and Let Die, and he did a lot of things in the Roger Moore era. And there's a lot of good things in each of those. I got to give a little shout out to On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Oh, I forgot about that one. Yeah.
I got to be reasonably good friends with George Lazenby. I've interviewed him a couple of times. In fact, one of my favorite moments, because I used to be a co-host of an online radio show, was I got him on along with Vic Flick at the same time, which was the first time those guys had met. And for those of you who don't know, Vic Flick was the guitar player who played the James Bond theme. Bum, 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 bum,
yeah. Oh, well, who doesn't know that theme,
That's right. Yeah.
My personal favorites, now, like I said, it's hard to narrow it down. But if I pick the favorite one of Sean Connery, I love Dr. No.
Yeah.
But if you want to go up in time a little bit, like the 80s, I liked Roger Moore in For Your Eyes Only.
Sure, why not? Yeah.
So those were really, really, really good.
That's when they brought him back to Earth after the big extravaganzas of The Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker.
Absolutely. Well, let me ask you, how do you think it's changed over time as far as espionage, effects that we see in movies now?
Espionage in movies and literature and all popular culture changes dramatically depending on what's going on in the world around us. For example, if you go to the beginning of the 20th century, being a spy was not cool. They were not popular. In the Encyclopedia Britannica, it says whenever a spy is discovered, he is hanged immediately. The very first spy movies, if you want to call them that, were the silent little 5-minute documents of spies being hung and executed. But that's what the term secret agent came from. Is they didn't want to call them spies because they were disreputable. That's what William Casey said when he took over for the CIA, is that Americans are doing their level best to distance themselves from espionage at the time. They did not like to think of the American founding dependent on espionage, despite the fact that one of the first American spies was George Washington.
That's it.
He was involved with that, and he set up spy rings. And in fact, there's the famous story of John Honeyman, who was one of Washington's spies in New York. And the neighborhood, the people in his community, did not like him. They thought he was a traitor until Washington came out and publicly praised him for the spy work that he did during the American Revolution. And that was kind of typical. The very first spy novel published in the U.S. was The Spy by James Fenimore Cooper, and it was about a peddler named Harvey Birch who spied for the U.S., well, the colonies at the time.
Sure.
He was disreputable. He was disliked, and
Wow.
kind of the way it was. Spies didn't really become heroes until much later.
Opinions changed over time. It's like they evolved.
Yes, especially during wartime. During wartime, there's kind of a peak in interest in espionage, and like World War One and especially World War Two, which bled over into the Cold War. So there was this kind of long, ongoing interest in espionage that, well, busted wide open during the '60s and the spy renaissance.
Oh, sure.
Along the way, the taste kind of changed. Probably most people don't know this, but in the very beginning, back in the silence, when the little movies were like 9 to 10 minutes long,
Yeah, right.
Them in
Shorts.
Nickelodeons, they were all designed for women because women were the primary audience, and the Nickelodeon owners wanted the women to come in, watch the movie, and get out. They wanted to keep the line moving, keep the line moving. And the very first spy series ever made was the girl spy movies that started in 1909. I think they made 4 of those.
I never heard of them.
Well, I'm not surprised. Well, they don't exist anymore.
Oh, they're out of print or just got lost, I'm sure. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's a whole lot of the silent movies that we know what they were, but there's no copies left anymore. But we know that they did exist at one time. But the whole thing, and there's always a lot of romance back in those days. When you had the bad spy and the American girl, or vice versa. A whole lot of love affairs. And in those days, people like to think that women's rights didn't happen until later. But in espionage films, women were often, the brains. They didn't do any of the fighting, really, but they were often, just as daring do oriented as the men in the films. And that kind of carried on because, well, for example, in the 70s, if you think about it, on TV, espionage shows could do things you couldn't do in other genres. Women couldn't act like, the spies in like a Western. They had to go back to the women's traditional roles, or in the sitcoms, they were housewives or maybe secretaries or something like that. But in spy movies, they could be out there as active as the men. They could be Emma Peel, beat up guys. Be Honey West, beat up guys. Or be 99, smarter than her partner. Because espionage gave them that kind of window. Which is also true for minorities back in the 60s. We could do, Bill Cosby could be unequal with Robert Culp because they weren't, it was a spy milieu. They weren't in Baltimore or Georgia or anything like that.
It's all equal. Yeah.
They were in Greece and Spain and Mexico and wherever, and they could do things out there internationally that they couldn't do back here in the States. So it's because of the genre that allowed for that kind of thing. And smart directors like Alfred Hitchcock, who from the very get-go had women right up there, just as smart and just as equal as the men, like in the 39 Steps. One of my favorite Alfred Hitchcock's, an underrated film, in my opinion. I'm in love with Madeline Carroll still. But
let me ask you this then. One of the questions we're going to talk about real life spies here in a second. We're talking about the media right now, but what are the connections do you see between literary spies and the media spies? What connections do you see?
Well, it depends, especially when you think of movies that are based on novels. You kind of hope that the movie has something of the novel built into what they're doing, like Graham Greene stories or Eric Ambler stories or Ian Fleming for that matter. And of course, they have the best James Bond novels, or made for the best James Bond movies when they used the novels. The Robert Ludlum and on and on and on. I lost track of what I was saying. What was I saying?
I was asking about the connections between the media spies and the literary spies.
Well, again, that changes over time too, because depending on the era, there are certain attitudes that were kind of expected. like in the 1950s was the McCarthy era and the big Red
True.
Scare. And there was all of this emphasis on being anti-commie, being anti-red, which led to a lot of movies, specifically didactic. I was a communist for the FBI, or the flagship TV show. It was I Led Three Lies, Herbert Philbrick, infiltrating commie circles and that kind of thing. So in those days, they really wanted black and white dichotomies and supposedly based on real files, because the FBI and other government agencies would give scriptwriters for radio shows, TV shows, movies, actual case files that they could turn into scripts for the various adventures.
Wow.
So you had that kind of authenticity. And House on 92nd Street, which is another really good spy movie that came out in the 50s.
I've not seen that. I'll check that out. I've not seen that.
Well, that one's kind of a half documentary, because back in those days, J. Edgar Hoover was really big on self-aggrandizing himself and his agency. So movies like that, he made sure that all those agents got in there and they were shown in the best possible light. And the communists were always the evil,
Oh yeah, the Red Scare.
Yeah. That's what the time. So that time period that you had that kind of attitude about things. And then you think of the 70s, things after Watergate, things kind of flipped around. And then in spy movies and literature, people were wondering, wait a minute, who is the good guys?
Exactly.
what is the moral thing to do? A lot of the questions about, like 3 Days of the Condor. Robert Redford was being chased by his own agency.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing happened in the 70s, where we completely flipped. And then in the 80s, when Reagan came into office, the tide turned to, okay, we want big heroes again. So that's when you have Arnold Schwarzenegger and all these guys out there, Rambo, Red Dawn, and all
Norris.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned something earlier that kind of brings me to my next subject. And I know my viewing audience will probably know, especially if they know their American history. You talked about the 50s, the 1950s, and the McCarthy era, which we've studied about. I'm going to bring a picture up of some spies from the 50s, and we know who it is. Let's see if my audience knows who this is. And I'll give you all that's watching this a hint. Okay, I'm going to show you the picture. Okay, the picture's there. So this is a husband and wife. They were notoriously known, and I stress the word notorious, in the 1950s. Can anybody identify this couple? I will give y'all a hint. That was something we studied in high school American history. So anybody want to take a guess? I will give you their husband. No guesses. So we'll tell you who they are. And, so Dr. Britton, you may have to tell us. I mean, I know a little bit about them, but you may have to refresh our memory. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. Okay. And now tell us, Dr. Britton, why was this couple so notorious in the 1950s?
Well, back in those days, spies who were going to give atomic secrets to the Russians were especially despised. What made these two so controversial was their attempt to try to claim that they were innocents, that they were dupes, especially Ethel, because there was a lot of people who thought, well, okay, maybe the woman's a spy, but you don't want to execute her. She's a woman after all. But the president, no, kill him, And so they were just among because the scare, the idea of, atomic secrets going to the Russians was the biggest possible scare you could have. And that could be, there's no greater treason than, and they did, the evidence over the years has been that they were guilty. No question about it. Them and Fuchs, and there were some others. And I don't know what else to say about them.
Well, let me show the audience. And so if you want to know kind of what happened, these people, the Rosenbergs, were found guilty and they were executed. In fact, here is a picture of the Los Angeles Times from back then. And in big, bold letters, as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, Rosenbergs die. pair executed for Adams spying. And if you can't read that little headline in the corner, it says Supreme Court and President Eisenhower reject couple's last plea. So again, they were accused of selling atomic secrets to the Russians. And this is during what they call the Red Scare of the 50s. So I'm sure that even sort of, made them want to give them the death penalty. Would you agree with that, Dr. Britton?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Kind of underlining what I just said.
Wow. So, yeah. So there's your American history lesson for the day.
One of them.
Well, we have a question from the audience, Dr. Britton. And like I said, I encourage our audience to ask questions during this. Gary Spikes is asking, what about the female spies in the Civil War? Are you familiar with female spies in the Civil War?
Oh, yeah, there's quite a few of them. And interestingly, in the early part of the 20th century, there was a whole spate of movies, in the silents and then in the early talkies, where women spies for the Confederacy were big. Because the South will rise again, sort of thing, all the way through D.W. Griffith and directors like that, where females. Well, like I said, and the first girl spy movies were a girl spy who worked for the Confederacy, and there were Union spies, or female. You're talking about Belle Boyd and things like that.
Harriet Tubman was a spy for the North.
Yeah, well, yeah, running on the Underground Railroad.
So, yeah, there was probably plenty of spies on both sides in the Confederacy and also on the Union, I'm sure.
I guess the kind of point I was trying to get to is that there was a long period, because back in the early part of the 20th century, there were a lot of people still alive who had been involved in the Civil War. So for them to see, champions of the Confederacy still around, warmed their Southern pride hearts.
Right. One thing, one other spy, Dr. Britton, that I did not know about. I just learned it from reading your website and learning more about you. And I'm very intrigued. So, ladies and gentlemen, this will be a learning experience for me as much as it is for you. I'm going to bring his picture up while you're talking about him. Tell us about Eli Cohen, who he was, what was his role, and kind of just a good broad biography about him. Who was Eli Cohen?
Well, here we go back to the years leading up to the formation of Israel.
Okay.
Eli Cohen and his family came from Syria, but he was born and grew up in Egypt because Israel didn't exist yet. And then not until 1948 was the country even established. And he worked for, then in those days, getting refugees into Israel was kind of it wasn't effort at espionage, because the mandate was that you're not supposed to be sending Jews to Israel, because that'll upset the Arabs. But, people did. And the Cohen family migrated from Egypt to Israel in bits and pieces. I became involved with the story back in 2006 when I did my second presentation at the International Spy Museum, when the director said, okay, if you're going to come do a presentation on movies and history, can you think of a good historical movie, something that's based on fact? I immediately said, yeah, The Impossible Spy, which I had seen on a DVD. It was an HBO movie produced by Harvey Chertok. And when I came down to do my presentation in 2006, the director of the museum had brought Harvey along. So I got to meet him and his wife, and we became friends immediately and still are.
Good.
And after that presentation, Harvey was contacted by a lady named Helene Fragment Abramson out in Princeton. She was hosting Maurice Cohen, who was one of Eli's younger brothers, who was also working for the Mossad back in the day. And in fact, I figured out that was his brother, who was our man in Damascus, Agent 88, because he recognized some of the names and mentioned in the messages that were sent back and forth. And they wanted to work on Maurice's autobiography. So I invited Harvey, and they invited me, and we all gathered out in Princeton forget for what holiday it was, but we kind of sat around to figure out what we're going to do for, Maurice's biography.
Hmm.
And then right after that, Maurice dies.
Oh no.
Right before he
Mm.
did, he sent me all his stuff. I had,
Oh, that's a good thing.
I had,
Oh.
well, partly a good thing. There's a lot of crap in there
Oh.
because
I'll have to search through.
he was doing a lot of research. He wanted to set the scene of Aleppo because that's where the Cohen family came from, and then Alexandria, where they lived in Egypt, and just you name it. I had to whittle that down to size to get what was usable, and then try to get. And then I got a hold of Abraham Cohen, Ellie's youngest brother, and he was contributing information that I hadn't heard before,
Oh,
hadn't
that's
seen before.
awesome.
Yeah, so I had two Cohen brothers involved, and in the end, I didn't really have a book, but I had about five really good articles that covered different periods of Ellie's life, from the growing up here in Egypt to him going to Argentina for a couple of years to build his cover identity
Hmm.
as Kamou Lebet, his Syrian name, fake Syrian name, and then going into Syria and being a spy and the things that he did there,
Hmm.
and then the aftermath, because after his execution, things stayed strange for a long, long time. So I put all those together, put them out, and they've been kind of the resource you need to read if you want to know about Eli Cohen.
Sounds interesting.
To the point, well, a couple of years ago, I get a phone. Every once in a while, I get a call from some film producer. It says they're going to do a movie or
Oh
a
wow.
miniseries with Eli Cohen,
What
and
an
nothing
honor.
ever comes of it
Mm.
until, well, I guess, yeah, last year, I got the call from a documentary producer for Al Jazeera Television, and he wanted me to be a talking head in a documentary that he was working on. And so next thing I know, I've got two guys came up from Washington, D.C., into this very room I'm sitting in, rearranged everything, put up a backdrop and all this stuff. And the producer was in Germany, so he was calling the shots over Skype, I guess it was.
Wow.
They interviewed me for about an hour or so. And then now you can see it. There's a link to that. It's Agent 86, Eli Cohen. The link is at my YouTube page
Okay.
that you can click on. And again, I'm the only English. Well, the narrator they did in the English version is English. Everybody else is talking in Middle Eastern languages. I'm not even sure what they all are. I'm presuming, Yiddish and that kind of thing. Because Eli Cohen's daughter is the first speaker in it, and then it's all
Okay.
these spy experts, from and Wesley Britton in the mix.
Now you mentioned Eli Cohen was with the Mossad. Okay,
Yes.
what is the Mossad for our audience?
Well, that's the primary agency for Israel's espionage. There's also the Amman, which is their military agency. I guess you could kind of like MI6 and British.
Okay.
And there's the other one. Oh, Lordy, their internal. I'm drawing up complete blank.
Yeah.
Shaw something. I'd have to look it up. It's been a while since.
Okay. He
But they
sounds like
got.
a very intriguing character, this Eli Cohen.
He
Uh,
was a mix of. Well, in Israel, he's a national hero. They named parks after him
oh,
and
wow.
streets after him. And Abraham, when he goes around, they all seem to know him. He's a celebrity because he was Ali Cohen's brother. Uh, they credit him with helping win the 7-Day War in '67,
Oh, that's awesome.
based around the story that he supposedly, I'm not sure I buy all this, suggested places that they plant eucalyptus trees so that when the invading force came up, they would know where to hit based on those trees.
Now you mentioned briefly, I think when you were giving your synopsis of him, he was executed. So how did they catch him, or how and where and when was he executed?
Well, Ellie was, if nothing else, a serious egotist. I
Mm.
can't be caught. He spent hours and hours and hours in his apartment sending messages back to Israel because he was in the elite. He knew the president of Syria. He knew the top premiers and everything else in Syria. He had a lot of hot information, but he didn't know when to get off the
Mm.
telegraph.
He just couldn't stop.
He just kept going and going and going and going. And that made it easy for the Syrians to track him down, to triangulate his position. It took him a while to narrow it down, but he gave him plenty of opportunities. They caught him red-handed.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
they came bursting through the doors, and there he was. He hadn't put the radio away, and well, there was nothing for it, but he got him,
Wow.
and they did not want to give him up. There's an international outcry because in those days, and then normal course of events was, if you catch a spy, you trade him to the other side and get him out.
Extradite them. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll trade. You want something in return,
Right.
and Israel was prepared to do that. They were to give him all kinds of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and the Pope got in on it, and the UN got in on it, and all these different countries sent pleas, for to spare Eli Cohen's life. Nuh-uh. Syrians were too ticked off at what he had accomplished. And logically speaking, you can understand why. The damage that he did and the position that he was in and the people he betrayed, at least from the Syrian point of view, weren't going to be too happy with him.
No, not at all. Well, you mentioned something that I'm intrigued with that I didn't know about. I don't know, maybe my audience knows, but I didn't know. You mentioned the International Spy Museum.
Yeah.
So I'm going to bring a picture of that. Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't know this existed. Maybe I heard it, but I didn't think much about it. But now I'm very intrigued. So, ladies and gentlemen, here is a picture of a spy museum. Yeah, you're seeing that right. Spy museum. So, Dr. Britton, tell us about the Spy Museum. Tell us where it's at and what all could a person see in there if they go.
Oh, wow. It is a day trip. If you go
a day trip.
Yeah, if you go there, you want to have a day set aside just to see it, because it's got floors and floors and rooms.
Really?
Insights into spy espionage has got quite a history. You go back to the Bible for stories about spies. And they have videos in each of the rooms with all these different artifacts from different times and places and devices and things. They have all kinds of games for kids because the kids can go in and crawl through eating ducts like a spy would.
Something for the kids too, for the whole family.
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah, and it's I just love it down there. It's been a while since I've been there. I need to go back again sometime, see what they got that's new. In fact, they got some of my stuff in there.
Your stuff's there. Oh, wow.
Yeah, they bought my Man from Uncle lunchbox and my Man from Uncle prop gun and some other little things I've forgotten now. But
you said this is in Washington, D.C.?
It's just down the street from Ford's Theater.
Wow, another historic place.
Yeah, to put it mildly.
I'm looking at the picture and it looks like this thing is huge. Like you said, it'd take a whole day to watch everything.
Oh, yeah. And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I'm looking forward to that. So if I go to Washington, D.C., that's going to be a must-see for me. Well, we talked a little bit about the fictional spies, for example, the James Bonds, and we talked about, Mission Impossible, which, ladies and gentlemen, the younger generation may not know, but now Mission Impossible didn't start with Tom Cruise. Now, I like his movies, but there was a TV series. In fact, I'll bring the picture up. This was the original 1960s cast with Peter Graves is in there. And so this was a TV series that later on Tom Cruise based his movies off of. Now, I can't name them all, Dr. Britton, other than Peter Graves. Do you know the other actors' names?
Martin Landau, he was the costume expert. There was Barbara Bain.
Yeah, I see her.
Barney Collier, he was the electronics expert. He was the African American in there.
Mm-hmm.
Was Peter Lupus. He's the strong man of the group.
Of course, Peter Graves, obviously, you got to have him in there. I see him.
Well, he wasn't in the first year. They brought him in the second year. But
I didn't know that. Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was the guy that on the Law and Order.
It's been a while since I've seen that, so I can't help you. Maybe our audience knows.
But and then the cast changed. In fact, in my chapter on that series in Spy Television, I call it interchangeable parts, because as time goes by, just about everybody disappeared. They would bring in new players. Leonard
Really?
Nimoy replaced Martin Landau as the disguise expert, and they had a whole different series of different women that came along.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, in the 70s, they brought it back with a new Mission Impossible, all new cast,
Sure.
except for Peter Graves. But when Ethan or when Tom Cruise took it over, it has very little to do with the TV
A
series.
little bit, yeah. Uh-huh.
And
We've talked about the TV series. We've talked about the real life spies. This is the Rosenbergs and Eli Cohen. But now I want to talk about you, Dr. Britton. You have written some of your own spy novels, and I definitely want to show the audience that and even promote it. So let me bring that up on the screen, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, Dr. Britton's written his own books. And so if you could, Dr. Britton, kind of tell us a little synopsis. Let's go one by one. How about, well, before I'm going to talk about on-screen and undercover, but I'm going to play some custom music, ladies and gentlemen, that Dr. Britton had made for him. I thought this would be appropriate while he's talking about his novels. So let's get this music on. And can you hear that?
oh yeah, I can.
Okay, this is perfect music. So tell us about On-Screen and Undercover, your book there, Dr. Britton. What's it about, the synopsis?
Okay, well, that was the third book in my spy series for Fraser Publishers. The first one was Spy Television, which was the first book that ever chronicled the entire history of spy TV series from 1951 to I guess it was 2003.
Oh, wow.
And the changes over the eras and different kinds of spies. The second one was Beyond Bond: Spies in Film and Fiction.
We see that one up there. Yeah, Beyond Bond. We see it. Uh-huh.
I kind of tried to do too much in that. It's got movies and literature and radio and all kinds of spies in the 20th century, really.
Not just Bond, it's everything. You cover everything.
Oh, yeah, Bond's a very small part of the whole thing. It starts off with those silent movies I was talking a little bit about earlier, up through 2006. So I guess the early Bourne movies, maybe the first Daniel Craig or so, and then On Screen and Undercover is strictly movies.
This movies only, okay?
It's movies only, yeah. Well, it's got little bits and pieces in there of history when they relate to what's going on, because a lot of times movies, connect in one way or another with what's happening in the world.
Uh-huh.
But the problem with those three books is Prager Publishers publishes them for libraries, so they're expensive.
Okay.
So that's why I did the Encyclopedia of TV Spies.
And we see that one here too. Uh-huh.
That was an attempt to make it an affordable book for the general reader. And I'm thinking about doing something like that for the other two, and I'm debating that idea. But the novels you were talking about, the first five, you can't really call spy novels. There's sci-fi novels, even though I'm not sure sci-fi is the best term for them.
Yeah.
It's about a blind guy on an alternate Earth who, they go through all kinds of different cultures, and he learns an awful lot about different ways of looking at the world on a different planet. And then comes Return to Alpha, and that's when I have the second generation.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bit more spycraft going on, especially in Behind Alien Lines.
Mm-hmm.
That is spy stories set on Beta Earth, which I kind of took a bunch of stuff from. I was doing a lot of reading about French female spies during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
There are all kinds of interesting stories and perspectives and settings and anecdotes. Just put them on a different Earth and jazz them up a bit.
I'll bring those the alien books up here in a second. We're still looking at the spy novels, but on the spy novels, it says they can go to SpyWiseSecretDossier.com. Is that the best way to order your books? Is there any other way to order these particular books?
Well, you'd probably want to go to Amazon, I'm sure.
Amazon.com. Okay.
Or in the case of the Encyclopedia of TV Spies, you go to Bear Manor Media. That's the publisher.
Okay. Okay, let me bring in now the alien book. Now you wrote a lot more books.
Yeah.
So let me bring this up here too. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 books. Let's see if I can read the titles out. Let's see, The Blind Alien, The Blood of Balnican. Did I say that
Valentine,
right?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
close enough.
When War Returns, A Throne for an Alien, The Third Earth, Return to Alpha, Alpha Tales 2044, and Behind Alien Lines. Now, is this all of a set? Are they all related, or are they standalone novels?
Well, the first five are all sequels to each other.
Okay.
Return to Alpha starts a whole new storyline, and we're selling it as a standalone. And in fact, it's the only one you can get at audible.com because it was read by a British narrator named Edmund Bloxham. Really nicely done. He brings a whole special level to that book that um, only a narrator can do, really. It just meant magical. And in Alpha Tales 2044 is the same thing. Those books feature a character named Mary Carpenter, who is a spy. She's a secret agent
Oh, another
for,
spy novel, really.
well, yeah, because, well, it's at 20 years in the future, after our planet has been decimated by global warming and a series of plagues released by the everlasting caliphate, Islamic terrorist, and it kind of really gets way out of hand, and it reduces our population by quite a bit. So we're a planet that's not really excited by the news of aliens coming to Earth. Everybody's all frightened, although there's nothing to be frightened of. So the aliens have to go on the run across the country. And
Sounds interesting. Mm.
oh, and Mary Carpenter is a lot of people's favorite character. She's, in my mind, she's very much based on Emma Peel.
I'm going to ask you, ladies and gentlemen, make sure, and I will show this again before we leave the air. Some of these books that you've got with their website address and order information. So, ladies and gentlemen, just even though I clicked off of it, I will display these before we leave. So don't think you've lost, and definitely check out his website as well. So let me ask you about the Real Life Spy. We talked about this kind of in our pre-show. What do you think of all the spies you've studied and you've heard about? What is the most intriguing? Or so I won't narrow it down to one. What are some of the most intriguing real life spies that you've studied or heard about, in your opinion?
Well, I guess it's tough. Yeah, you're right. We were talking about that in the pre-interview. It is so tough to pick out the best of anything, in my view, because there's probably a whole lot of good contenders. Like, what's the best spy movie? Well, is it Spy Game? Pretty close. Is it Thunderbolt? What's the best novel? Well, I can toss out a bunch of contenders for that. In terms of actual spies, well, one story that comes to mind is when William Casey came to D.C. to take over for the CIA.
William Casey? Okay. I'm going to get the name. All right.
Yeah. He saw the statue of Nathan Hale outside of CIA headquarters, and he thought, now that is a terrible representation of American intelligence. Nathan Hale was not the world's most successful spy. I mean, after all, he was caught, he was hung.
Mm-hmm.
Casey thought we needed a much better example, and he thought we needed a statue of Wild Bill Donovan, the guy who created the OSS in World War II that paved the way for the CIA. And Wild Bill, he deserved the name Wild Bill. He bucked a lot of authorities at the time, but without him, I don't know what we'd have done with espionage in World War II. But I guess for me, the next thought that comes to mind is we tend to think of spies as, lone wolves and things like that. Yeah. Most of the time, they're members of a team. Have got to do different things. They got different expertise. You got one agent who does this, another agent who accomplishes that. But and there are, Eli Cohen, good example of a lone wolf. Although he was reporting to the Mossad all the time. In terms of actual spies, I pick out as models to follow. Oh, I'd have to think about that. I don't have any quick answers to that.
There's so many out there. I know. And, that's got to be, I'm thinking about in real life, that has got to be a hard life because, yes. I mean, you're just, in my opinion, a spy is just one step away from being caught. At least that's how I view that. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Yeah. A lot of people, actually, when you think about it, James Bond is not a spy. And a lot of movie characters like that, they're really investigators. A lot of times they're just about the same as like a Sherlock Holmes or something like that. The big difference between spy stories and mystery stories is that the scale of consequence. With Agatha Christie, it's in a hotel somewhere, a little small town or something like that. Whereas, the Avengers or the Man from Uncle, they're globetrotters. They're dealing with schemes and madmen and enemies who are, it's either the other side politically or a madman who's got some kind of weather controlling machine or something they can destroy the world with. And they're investigating. They're rarely really undercover. I mean, James Bond is rarely, not James Bond, a phony name or anything like that. Whereas a real spy, well, more like an Eli Cohen, they are undercover. They have a covert identity that they've got to protect. And that's one reason why for many, many years, they didn't want married spies, married secret agents, because they had families to look out after. They could be easily compromised.
Blackmailed or whatever, Oh, I didn't think about that.
But that was especially in the 60s. That was the decade of the Playboy spy, where they could get out there and they could be glamorous and do all the kinds of things that no real spy could possibly think about. Although I read one quote from some secret, I've forgotten the name. He says, everybody knows that, James Bond isn't for real, but he doesn't think there's a single agent in the CIA who didn't at one time or another have a bit of that swagger that I'm going to be like James Bond. I forgot where I was going. Was I going somewhere?
I think I was just kind of asking a generic question, but let me ask you this: in your research and your expertise, Dr. Britton, I don't. That's the only way I don't know how to else to ask the question. It might be a broad question, but how does one? Well, it's kind of a two-pronged question. How does one become a quote unquote spy? How does the government know? I mean, just say, okay, for example, John Doe, I'll just use a generic term. How do they know John Doe would be a good spy, and what training, if any, I'm sure that John Doe would have to be a spy? How does that, in your opinion, in your research, come about?
Well, they do a lot of recruiting. In fact, I've met some of the CIA recruiters when they came to our local community college. But they look for I've heard them say many times that the attributes of a good spy haven't really changed since biblical times. That what we need are people who have got good observational skills.
Detail oriented, I'm sure.
Detail oriented, yes. That they're very good at knowing their geography around them. And they're able to do that. The observational skills, quick thinking, being able to think on your feet to react to situations that are around you, being able to absorb the atmosphere around you and make it your own. And then beyond that is, going to be all the kind of things that a police officer be trained in, how to use equipment and how to use this and how to fight and or languages, depending on where you're supposed to be going or what it is you're going to be doing. It gets to be very, very specialized. And since I've never done that,
do you think military experience is a prerequisite for that, or no?
Not a prerequisite, but it certainly doesn't hurt, because there you establish courage. There you establish leadership. There you display patriotism. And there you got to demonstrate all of those skills we were talking about earlier. Observation, being able to adapt to your geography. I would think anybody who's had experience in Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever would be steps and steps and steps ahead of anybody who hadn't had that kind of experience.
I agree. I was just wondering how they do their process of process of elimination, but how do they get? And when I say they, governments, and not just USA, but any government, get the best of the best, and then not only get the training, but unfortunately, we hear the term double agent, where they're playing both sides. So I guess there has to be some matter of trust.
Oh yeah. And it kind of depends too on era. Like in England, for a long, long time, it was well known that they wanted their agents from a certain class of society. That if you were in the sportsman ranks or whatever you want to call them, the upper crust, they were more likely to be trusted. The OSS, when they first came out, there was the jokes that it stood for "oh so social." because it reached up into those ranks of,
Hmm.
and even here in the States, if you go to George Washington University and that sort of thing, you're probably more likely to catch the eye of a recruiter than up here in little Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
Hmm. So your books, I mean, I'm going to bring your books back up, your spy novels, for the people that did not have caught that. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are 4 books that you can get Dr. Britton's Spy, whysecretdossier.com or Amazon. There's On Screen and Undercover. There's the Encyclopedia of TV Spies. There's Spy Television and Beyond Bond. Boy, Dr. Britton, every one of these look intriguing. I don't even know where to start. When I ordered all of them, I don't know which one to start with. What would you recommend if I ordered all of them? Which one should I start with, or does it
Beyond
matter?
Bond.
Start with Beyond Bond. Okay.
Yeah,
All
because
right.
that
Yeah.
covers a lot of different things. I was rereading it and reading On Screen in preparation for this interview. And
Mm-hmm.
Beyond Bond, I amazed myself. I did that.
Oh, wow.
And On Screen, I think I have to confess, is rather dry. It's a long recitation of all of these movies in different times, and unless you're really, really, really um, absorbed with the subject, it's more for referencing and researching that. But Beyond Bond, I'm kind of proud of. I really am.
I'll definitely have to check that out, and I would encourage my audience to do that as well. Let me bring your other set of books up. This is the Alien books that you can get on either Amazon.com, and this one is drwesley.britton.com.
Yeah, I got 2 websites. Yeah, one for spy stuff
Okay.
and one for sci-fi.
And you know what? I mean, they all look interesting, but the one you described, Behind Alien Lines, sounds very intriguing to me. They all do, but that one especially for me, that one stands out to me for some reason.
Okay, well, maybe
So
because it's got spies in it.
that's probably it. Yeah. So, ladies and gentlemen, yeah, I would highly encourage you to buy these books. They sound very, very interesting, and I'm very intrigued because I myself am not a writer, so I envy people that are, and so
Well,
I get to read their books as well.
thank you. I appreciate all the plugs.
Hey, no problem. Uh, Let me ask you this. There's another question I haven't asked yet. Can you explain how real life espionage affects how we see fictional spies? We kind of covered it a little bit, but when we hear about a real spy, espionage, spying, does that change? You think that changes the public's perception of the fictional shows?
It has over the years. Like I say, during the wartime, there's this we want to see the heroes that take care of us, especially on the home front.
Mm-hmm.
In World War II in particular, there wasn't so much spies behind enemy lines that were in the movies, but rather those who were protecting us from terrorists and bombers that would be hitting us here on the homeland. And then in the Cold War was all of that fear of the commie menace who were, they were just everywhere under the bed and in the cupboard and the closet. And, it was
Is
crazy.
everywhere.
And then in the 60s, it was so much fantasy that it was kind of a relief from real spies because we were hearing a lot more about the Cold War that you would see in The Spy Who Came In from the Cold and Tinker
Mm-hmm.
Tailor Soldier Spy and all of that really gritty, realistic stuff, which is usually mostly by the Brits, by the way. We saw a lot more British literature about espionage than we did in America. I think Donald Hamilton was one of the first successful ones who did all the
Oh,
Mad Elm,
really? Oh, okay.
which are a lot more gritty than the Mad Elm silliness. Um, but later, we had more American writers. E. Howard Hunt, one of the Watergate conspirators, had a pretty successful series of novels. And of course, Tom Clancy.
No, obviously can't leave him out.
No, you can't leave him out. And Robert Ludlum, and then those guys. I forgot what I was talking about.
We're talking about how does espionage, when we hear about espionage in real life, how does that
Oh,
affect how we see the fictional spy movies on the big screen?
well, obviously, movies and TV and even books are going to dramatize things.
True.
When Somerset Maugham wrote his book Ascendant, one of the classics of the genre, He was among many of those who say that a lot of espionage is tedious, it's mundane, and it's pointless. And during the Cold War, there was a lot of that questioning of what are we accomplishing? What is the meaning of it
Mhm.
all?
Right.
Um, and after Watergate, everything really changed
Oh
when
yeah,
people
I'm
started
sure.
to worry about well, then because certain presidents created their own little side
Hmm.
units, the plumbers for Nixon, and then
Yep.
Nixon
The
is
plumbers. Yep. I remember those.
Iran Contra folks and all of that, and they moved outside the congressional limits. Um, yeah, they get the marching orders. I've heard many people complain about the CIA, and they always point to Salvador Allende in Chile, which is probably one of the least most important of the CIA's atrocities. But
Hmm.
they didn't want to do it. That was Nixon and Kissinger, and you have to do it. The
Sure.
presidents give the marching orders, and then our warriors go off and do it. Um, and that's something to bear in mind that the political wins have a lot to do with what the officers are going to be doing or not doing.
Sure.
Um, and the philosophical questions are really more important in a lot of ways than the tactical day to day uses of spy technology. Because, sacrifice innocent people in order to preserve secrets,
Yeah.
or that's one that leaps out at me most. Um, what are we willing to sacrifice in order to have security?
Hmm.
After 9/11, we had a lot of those
Oh,
questions.
that changed everything. Yeah, I told you about some stuff in our pre-interview when I was working in the financial industry. I mean, security. It was security plus, which it had to be, but
Yeah.
it just that we saw a lot of that then. And but on a personal note, talking about spies, and who do you trust? One of the things that I was most intrigued by, it was unfortunate that it happened, was during the Cold War. We had a West Germany and we had a East Germany. Of course, we had the iron in the wall. So you had I've read, since the wall came down, even that there were West Germans posing as East Germans, spying on the East Germans, but there were also a great number of East Germans going over to the West side, spying on the West Germans. So,
The
they,
Stasi.
yeah, the Stasi, they both spoke German. They went right into society. So they're actually the two Germanys were actually spying on each other during the Cold War. I've
Oh,
read
yeah.
some novels, and that was very interesting.
Oh, well, Berlin was the epicenter of spy
Yeah,
literature and spy movies throughout the Cold War from the beginning. All these, going back and forth over the wall, under the wall, through the wall.
yeah.
Um,
Any way they could over the wall or in the
yeah.
wall or outside or whatever. But I've always thought
Oh,
that was
another thing
interesting.
that people might think about is when La Femme Nikita came out. It was a very cold. It looks at spies as very amoral, cold-hearted.
Was that when what came out? What was that you said?
La Femme Nikita.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I
It
know
was a
that
movie, and
now.
then it was a, and
Yes.
at the time they're wondering why it was so popular. And one of the reasons is that many people felt their own companies, their own industries were just as cold-hearted, just as institutionally sterile as the world that the spies were in. So they related to it.
Hmm.
They saw, the Femme Nikita and all those assassins as being just like the people in their own office place.
Hmm.
So
Sure.
sometimes we will see in the fictional world of espionage our real world, even if we're very far removed from clandestine opportunities.
Well, Dr. Britton, that's all the questions I had. I want to remind my audience, go through this again, go through his website, order his books. In fact, here's a picture here that his publicist sent me. It's one of his many, many book signings. Look at all the books on that table. So obviously a very, very accomplished author.
Oh,
So we're looking forward to seeing more from you, Dr. Britton. And it's like I said, it's the world of spies. For a lot of us, what I call us civvies or civilians. I mean, I talk about. I'm very intrigued by that because it's a secret world, which
yeah.
it has to be a secret world. So any kind of real life spies that we hear about, like Eli Cohen, or even like the fictional spies that we see on movies, for example, Ethan Hunt, the Tom Cruise movies.
Yeah.
It's intriguing to see, because especially when I watch a movie, I'm on the edge of my seat. Oh no, is he or she going to get caught doing this? And I can only imagine in real life, that's probably a lot more anxiety, and the blood pressure
Anxiety,
goes
yeah.
right up. Yeah. So I'm glad you're doing this. And I've learned a lot just from talking to you. And we look forward to seeing even more stuff from you, Dr. Britton.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So thanks for being on the show. And you hope you have a great week, sir.
You too. Have a good year.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it all for tonight. I hope you had a really, really interesting time. I know I did. I learned a lot. When we think about spies, we are collectively intrigued by that. Because, it's always, if it's a movie, it's an edgier seat thriller. You don't know, are they going to get caught? Oh, no. But I can only imagine the real life spies, what they go through and how the secrets and, you're one step ahead of the enemy, basically. So I'm sure that's something that they could even write a book about themselves. That's going to do it for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you had a great time. A reminder, once a week, Van Buren Variety is right here. And if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you subscribe. And if you like this episode tonight, make sure you hit that like button so we can get a lot of feedback from you, my audience. And, give us keep our subscription up there too as well. So that's going to do it for me tonight, ladies and gentlemen. I am Bob Van Buren with the Van Buren Variety Show. Hope you had a very, very great time as I did. And have a great evening, everybody. Good night.